Now, say my name.
This is one of the most iconic scenes in Breaking Bad, and it's also the moment when Walter's presence is at its peak. To protect the 1,000 gallons of methylamine he risked his life to obtain, Walter, along with Mike and Jesse, personally meets with Declan for negotiations. Although the name Heisenberg was already legendary in the underground world, they knew the name but had never met Heisenberg in person. Declan initially dismisses Walter with disdain but ultimately is impressed by Walter's strong negotiation tactics and asks who he is.
Who the hell are you?
You know. You all know exactly who I am. Say my name.
Do what? I don't have a damn clue who the hell you are.
Yeah, you do. I'm the man who killed Gus Fring.
Bullshit. Cartel got Fring.
You sure? That's right. Now, say my name.
Heisenberg.
You're goddamn right.
Clearly, Walter's negotiation was very successful, and he even secured Mike's $5 million retirement fund in advance. However, Jesse didn't have the same luck as Mike. Walter didn't secure any retirement fund for him, clearly indicating that he still wants Jesse to work for him. This situation also teaches us that if you want to resign, do it decisively and pursue what you truly find meaningful. Back at the warehouse, before Mike leaves, he reminds Walter that he will handle the hush money for his man. He tells Walter to quickly remove the bug in Hank's office because the DEA is going to conduct a thorough inspection soon. As Mike is about to leave, the triumphant Walter can't resist making a few sarcastic remarks.
That's it. Oh, thanks for the $5 million. Sorry for chaining you to a radiator. Just get the bug, Walter.
But Mike doesn't buy into any of it, because Jesse has gone through life and death situations with Mike. This has strengthened their bond. Jesse reluctantly shakes hands with Mike to say goodbye, while Walter lurks in the shadows, watching his employees like a boss. Afterward, Jesse helps Walter temporarily hide the methylamine at his car wash. With the money in hand, Mike hires a lawyer named Dan to go to the prison and pay off the hush money for his 9 men inside. This time, he asks for a large storage locker, filling it with cash, and leaves an envelope on top with a letter for his granddaughter Kaylee's 18th birthday. This clearly shows Mike's deep love for Kaylee. Later, Dan reports back to Mike, assuring him that everything is under control and there's no need to worry. Then Mike goes to the outskirts to continue monitoring Hank's office. He hears that Steven has obtained a search warrant that will be executed in about 2 hours. Upon hearing this, Mike begins to prepare for the DEA search. He throws his laptop and longtime belongings into a well. He then hides the money he needs for the journey in the trunk of his car. To avoid being caught by the DEA, Mike hides his car keys on a beam in the parking garage and takes a cab home to face the investigation. Mike barely has time to take a sip of water before the DEA arrives in full force. Hank flaunts his search warrant, unaware that Mike has everything under control. After searching for a long time without finding anything, Hank is left bewildered, staring at the calm and collected Mike. Although Hank's suspicions were spot on, he didn't know that the bug Walter planted monitored his every move. Back at the office, even during meetings with his superiors, Hank is still investigating Mike's case. After the meeting, his boss speaks to Hank alone, reprimanding him for spending too much time on Gus's case and reminding him that, as a director, he should oversee all cases. Upon learning that Hank personally led a search of Mike's house but came up empty-handed, his superior was furious and cut off all funding for Hank's investigation into Mike. Steven also indicated that Mike didn't seem like he was planning to flee, so they decided to drop the investigation into Mike. Subsequently, Hank turned his attention to the 9 people in prison, but they were tough and even the prospect of reduced sentences couldn't entice them to talk. Hank concluded that someone must have paid a substantial amount of hush money, otherwise, this didn't make sense. However, their investigation into the bank accounts of these individuals turned up no clues. Hank discovered that the defense lawyer for these individuals was the same person, a guy named Dan. So, he had Steven keep an eye on this lawyer. Sure enough, just as Hank suspected, when Dan went to the prison again to deliver the hush money, Steven caught him red-handed.
Hey.
Meanwhile, Walter had already set up a new secret lab on his own. Jesse approached Walter wanting to discuss quitting again. Although Walter knew Jesse's intention, he pretended to be clueless. He handed Jesse a pair of gloves and told him that they needed to double their production. Walter now acknowledges Jesse, saying that the contraband he produces can rival his own. But Jesse didn't buy it and insisted on his decision to quit. Helpless, Walter began to brainwash Jesse again.
The best at something? And what, you want to squander that potential? Your potential? Why? To do what?
I'll figure it out, all right?
Look at you. What have you got in your life, huh? Nothing. Nobody. Oh, wait, yes. Video games and go-karts. Oh, and when you get tired of that, what then? Huh?
Walter then brought up the innocent boy who had died, saying he was just as sad and upset as Jesse, because after Walter watched the news about the boy's disappearance, he was still whistling nonchalantly. Faced with Walter's nonsense, Jesse directly confronted him. Walter realizes that his lie has been discovered and desperately tries to cover it up.
It's done! It makes me sick that it happened, just like everyone else who has died in our wake. What Todd did, you and I have done things that are just as bad. Yeah. We're already pretty much going there, right? But I'm not gonna lie down until I get there.
What, just because I don't want to more, I'm lying down? I'm done. Okay? You just give me my money and you and we're done.
Seeing that Jesse was determined to leave, Walter dismissed him with a few curt words.
So stay and work with me, and you can make 10 times, 20 times as much.
You want to pay me? I don't care.
Yes, you do.
It's on you. All right.
Because if you leave, you get nothing. You understand me? Nothing! Jesse!
Helpless, Walter turned to Todd to be his assistant. Compared to Jesse when he first started learning from Walter, Todd, who hadn't even finished elementary school, seemed particularly diligent. It was evident that Todd valued Walter's mentorship and cherished this opportunity, as he even reviewed his notes during breaks. After a series of complex operations, Todd admitted he still needed more practice. Walter also noticed that Todd had some gaps compared to Jesse, who had learned some chemistry in high school. Walter was about to discuss Todd's pay, but Todd said they could talk about it once he got the hang of things. It must be said that Todd was quite sensible in this regard. Bosses always appreciate employees who focus on the work rather than the money. Then Walter went to Hank's office to continue his act. This back and forth was starting to irritate Hank, who thought, "I'm busy cracking the Heisenberg case. What are you doing here?" Little did he know that he was making coffee for Heisenberg himself. Walter seized the opportunity to quickly remove the bug and unplug the device from the computer. Just as they were awkwardly drinking coffee, Steven, who had just arrested Dan, came in to report to Hank. Steven said that Dan was willing to testify against Mike. Hank immediately sent people to arrest Mike. Walter overheard all of this. Meanwhile, Mike was at the park playing with his granddaughter when he received a call from Dan. Dan made an excuse to meet him and got his exact location. Mike then received a call from Walter.
The DEA, somebody flipped. They have some kind of bank surveillance and something about some lawyer. Someone is talking, Mike, and they're coming for you right now.
Hearing what Walter said, Mike wanted to say goodbye to Kaylee, but there wasn't enough time. He looked at his granddaughter on the swing with deep sorrow. Little did he know that this goodbye would be forever. Walter and Jesse went to Saul to discuss their options. If Mike got caught and confessed, the three of them would go down as well. However, Jesse firmly believed that Mike wouldn't rat them out. Walter also trusted Mike's integrity but didn't trust the 9 men in prison. Without the hush money, they might confess. At that moment, Mike called Saul because he couldn't go to the parking lot to pick up his package with the DEA on his tail. Mike asked Saul to deliver it instead, but Saul, as Mike's defense lawyer, feared he might be under DEA surveillance and didn't want to take the risk. Jesse volunteered to help Mike, but Mike kindly refused. Seeing both options fall through, Walter hastily took on the task. After getting the key, Walter checked Mike's package. Besides some cash and a passport, there was a gun inside. Before handing over the package, Walter demanded that Mike give him the names of his 9 men in prison. Mike ignored him and grabbed his package.
Goodbye, Walter. You're welcome. I want those names, Mike. You owe me that much.
I don't owe you a damn thing. All of this, falling apart like this, is on you.
Wow.
We had a good thing, you stupid son of a... We had Fring. We had a lab. We had everything we needed and it all ran like clockwork. You just had to be the man. If you'd done your job, known your place, we'd all be fine right now.
Mike's words enraged the now darkened Walter. Walter rushed back to his car, retrieved something, and hurried towards Mike. In his car, Mike checked his package and realized the gun was missing. Mike never thought that Walter would kill him. Seeing that Mike had escaped, Walter chased him all the way to the river. Mike still had a gun but chose to leave peacefully rather than confront Walter. At this moment, Walter is a bit panicked, and he keeps on justifying his behavior.
I just realized that Lydia has the names. I can get them from her. I'm sorry, Mike.
Up. Let me die in peace.
And so, the most steadfast character in Breaking Bad met his end. Although Mike was part of a criminal enterprise, his death leaves us feeling sorrowful. Because of Mike's tenacity and dedication, he was always determined to carry out Gus's plan, and could be considered as the most stable executor. At the same time, he strictly adhered to his principles, never crossing the line or getting greedy, and always maintained his love for his family. Which character do you prefer, Mike or Walter? This is Walter's darkest moment in Breaking Bad. As the mastermind, he orchestrated the murder of 10 informants in prison in just 2 minutes. This cleared the path for him to establish his vast business empire, because Walter couldn't get the names of Mike's men in prison from Mike. After disposing of Mike's body, Walter immediately arranged to meet Lydia, who knew the names. Shrewd Lydia had a backup plan. She didn't hand over the list to Walter easily, fearing he would kill her once he had it. Last time, Lydia saved her life by giving Walter information on acquiring a large supply of methylamine when she was on the brink of death. This time, Lydia also set a condition for Walter not to kill her. Lydia promised that, given her position, she could help Walter expand into overseas markets. This perfectly aligned with Walter's grand ambition to build a commercial empire. Walter was still somewhat skeptical of Lydia's plan. If the overseas market was so lucrative, why didn't she offer this channel to Gus? Lydia explained that she had already reached an agreement with Gus, but unfortunately, Gus didn't live to see it. Seeing that Walter had no objections, Lydia confidently wrote down the names of Mike's men.
Shake on it. We're going to make a lot of money together.
After Lydia left, Walter gently lifted his hat, revealing the ricin he had prepared. This confirmed Lydia's fears were justified, but once again, she used her skills to escape a life-threatening situation. Walter, therefore, gained an unexpected advantage. Back home, he hid the ricin back into the outlet, hinting that Walter would use it again in the future. Walter then approached Todd's uncle, Jack, to help eliminate the informants on the list. Todd had mentioned that his uncle had connections in the prison, while Jack and the others worked out the details of the assassination plan. Walter stared at a worn painting on the wall. This painting had appeared back in the distant second season. At that time, Walter and Jesse had just escaped Tuco's grasp, and Walter faked amnesia to get into the hospital. The painting of a man rowing away from his family symbolized Walter's growing distance from his own family. Now, with the painting reappearing, Walter was not only further from his family, but he was also losing himself. Jack and his men discussed for a long time and finally said they could kill a few of the targets, but not within 2 minutes. However, Walter didn't compromise and insisted they follow his timeline. It was evident that Walter spent a significant amount of money on this. The next day, Walter, at home, started the timer. Within 2 minutes, the 9 informants in prison, along with Dan, Mike's lawyer, were all dead. When the 2 minutes were up, Walter received a call right on time.
It's done.
Hank then received the news of the murders and was furious. Prior to this, Hank had already arranged a deal with the former manager of Gus's laundromat to take his statement the next day. Fuming, Hank went home and ran into Walter, who was there visiting his daughter. In his foul mood, Hank drank with Walter, complaining about how hard it was to catch a criminal mastermind. Little did he know, Walter was the one orchestrating everything behind the scenes. Thus, Walter finally entered his phase of frenzied money-making, because Walter has been complaining since season 1 that Jesse's sales are too slow and the risk he's taking isn't proportional to the reward. Later, he worked for Gus, but he was always just an employee. After Gus's death, he partnered with Jesse and Mike, but a portion of their earnings was taken by Mike's men as hush money, so Walter never made money in the most efficient way. Starting from this episode, Walter took Gus's place, Todd replaced Jesse, and Lydia replaced Gus's partner who had committed suicide out of guilt. This new combination began to operate with true efficiency, until the end. Even Walter himself didn't expect to make so much money.
How much is this?
I have no earthly idea. I truly don't. There is more money here than we could spend in 10 lifetimes. I certainly can't launder it. Not with 100 car washes. I want my life back. Please tell me. How much is enough? How big does this pile have to be?
Seeing the piles of cash and hearing Skylar's persuasion, Walter's ambition was finally satisfied. Walter realized it was time to quit, so he went to the hospital for a thorough checkup to see if he still had time to spend the money. Although Walter didn't wait for the final results, the director showed us a familiar prop again. It was the metal box that an emotionally out-of-control Walter had punched with his bare hands back in the second season. Walter had seen a large white area on his lung in the scans and thought his days were numbered, so he dragged Jesse to the desert to create contraband in a frenzy. Due to Jesse's carelessness, they almost got trapped in the desert. Feeling that he had skirted death twice, Walter's final diagnosis showed his condition had improved. Though it should have been good news, Walter felt as if he had been played. Walter then sought out Jesse, whom he hadn't seen for a long time, since their last fallout. Jesse had come to ask Walter about Mike the next day. At that time, Walter was preparing for Todd to dispose of Mike's body. Walter said that Mike was gone, but Jesse didn't catch the deeper meaning. He then asked what would happen to the 9 men in prison. Walter replied it had nothing to do with him anymore and then drove Jesse away. Since then, they hadn't contacted each other. When Walter saw Jesse again, there was an awkward tension between them. Jesse had learned from Saul that Walter had eliminated all the informants within 2 minutes. Filling him with fear of Walter, they awkwardly reminisced about their past but quickly ran out of things to say.
So hey, I gotta get going.
Yeah,
just meeting up
me
with
too.
some friends.
I gotta get going as well. I left something for you.
Jesse nervously opened a package only to find it was the $5 million Walter owed him. Jesse had thought Walter came to kill him and had even armed himself for self-defense. But it turned out he was overthinking. Although Walter had become extremely dark, he never intended to kill Jesse. This showed that Walter's feelings for Jesse were akin to those for his own child. Relieved, Walter returned home and finally said the words Skylar had been waiting to hear.
I'm out.
Deciding to quit, Walter began to reclaim his old self and life. The family gatherings were once again filled with laughter, and Skylar's long-lost smile reappeared. Just when everyone thought the show could end on a perfect note, a massive twist arrived. Hank had an upset stomach and went to the bathroom. Out of boredom, he picked up a book lying on the toilet. Unfortunately, it was Gail's copy of Leaves of Grass. At the beginning of the episode, when Walter was taking a shower, the camera had already shown this book, foreshadowing Hank finding it at the end of the episode. Seeing Gail's handwritten dedication on the title page, Hank immediately remembered the time he and Walter were reviewing Gail's files together.
Willy Wonka? Woodrow Wilson? Walter White? You got me.
Hank suddenly lost the urge to relieve himself. He quickly pulled up his pants and walked out, trembling, unable to believe what he had just found. Then Hank secretly hid the book in Marie's bag and dragged Marie back with him on the pretext that he had a tummy ache. At this moment, Hank couldn't even look Walter in the eye, but Walter had no idea that his disaster was about to unfold. On the way home, Hank was sweating profusely from fear, his mind blank and vision blurred.
Hank? 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 Okay.
The Walter who had been hiding in plain sight was finally discovered, a result of his own pride and arrogance. Because of Gail's admiration, Walter couldn't bring himself to get rid of the Leaves of Grass book that contained Gail's handwriting. Breaking Bad Season 5 consists of 16 episodes, and the next 8 will showcase the series' most brilliant moments. Let's wait and see.